Hey awesome people, welcome to my channel. This is Sapta, and if you're here for the first time, this is the place where I help designers build and scale their career with tips, suggestions and tutorials. So if you're into it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Today in this episode, I'm going to teach you how to make this. A masterclass in motion design cannot be complete without a pull to refresh animation, and that's exactly what we are going to do today. A pull to refresh is simple. You pull to refresh, and while it's refreshing in those 2 or 3 seconds, you tell a story. And I'm here today to teach you how to create one of those stories. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Here are my assets. It's simple. The only asset that I'll be using is this mug, which is nothing but the outline of the picture that I thought I could use. And these are the cards. These cards are actually identical. They are white right now. But regardless, I will use all these different images so that later I can always replace these assets with the cards I want, and it'll automatically update my animation. So here I am in After Effects. I will double click on this project panel and import all these assets which I have created. So here they are. And I'll go ahead and create a new composition, and as usual I will go for a width of 1080 into 2400, a frame rate of 60, a duration of 10 seconds is good enough. Resolution, I'll leave it a quarter. As you know, it doesn't quite matter because this resolution only refers to the quality of the preview that you see while you're working on it, and it doesn't affect the quality of the final render. I'll give it a name of mobile main or something like that, which just differentiates. I click OK, and this is my mobile frame. This is where we are going to work. But we will start with a smaller one. Another composition. Let me go ahead and create another composition. Command and N to open the composition settings. And this one, I'll make it 300 by 300. Rest of it can remain same. Frame rate of 60, duration of 10. Good enough. I'll just go ahead and hit OK. Now, this is the place where I will assemble the beer mug, and then after animating the things inside, I will plonk it into the main mobile, which will have my cards and everything else. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll just give it a name as well. This is the beer mug. Okay, so this is white right now. I'll just add a background so that I get to see better what is happening. I will use the rectangle tool, double click on it to create a rectangle, which is exactly the size of the composition. It's white right now so that you don't see it. I will give it any darker shade. I'll keep it black for now. I don't need a stroke. I will go ahead and remove this as well. So this is my background just for my reference. I'll just lock it. I'll not be using this at all, just for my reference. Now let me pull in this image mug.png and I place it here. So here's my mug. I will set the quality to full so that you see what's happening here. I'll align it to the center of the artboard. So keep in mind that it's not the center of the whole image. I want to center the volume or this dipper section of this mug with the composition. And I think this is roughly there. This thing is centered with the artboard. I will bring it down here. This is good enough. I'll go ahead and lock this layer so that it doesn't disturb or it doesn't move. The next step is to create an outline for the beer. For that, I will use a rectangle tool. I will take the rectangle and I will draw one shape, which is something like this. I'll go ahead and align it with the mug somewhere here. I'll give it a different color so that I see what's happening. Let me give it a color yellow. This is not going to be the beer layer, but regardless, so that I see it better in front of this black background, I've made it yellow. All that I need to do is just center, just ensure that, the amount of mug that you see on the left and the right side are kind of equal. That's about it. And I'll also take it up somewhere here. So all that I'm ensuring here is that this space is roughly equal to this, is roughly equal to this. That's about it. I think this looks good. Now for this, I will go to Content, Rectangle 1. I'll expand Rectangle Path and give it a roundedness. And to see how much I need, I will just use my eye estimation and see so that it roughly looks good with the outline of the mug. I think around 36 is good enough. Next, I'll make some edits to this shape because you see it's a perfect rectangle, but I want it to be a trapezoid. And to do that, I will do one small thing here. You see, this is a rectangular path, which means the rectangle size, the roundedness, everything is intact. So After Effects recognizes that this is a rectangle and not anything else. But I want to make it, or I want to convert it into a generic shape, which is nothing but a Bezier path. To do that, I will click on this rectangle path 1, right click on it, click on Convert to Bezier path. Now be sure that before you do this, you set the roundedness and all just like the way you want it, because you won't be able to edit roundedness in a separate way after you convert it to a Bezier path. So let me go ahead and click it. This is a destructive property, which means, you see, now you don't have those roundedness and all. All that you have is a simple path, and you can animate this path. Now, while I've selected path 1, I will use my move tool and I will make some changes to it so that it looks like a trapezoid. I will select them and bring them a little in so that, this kind of is parallel with the edge of the mug. I will do the same to the other side as well. I'll zoom out and see if it looks fine. I think this is good. I will just select all of these top ones and take it a little outside like this. You'll know in a bit why I have done that. Okay, I think this looks good enough. Now this shape layer 2 is in my beer. This is going to be the mask of my beer. So let's go ahead and draw a beer. The beer is nothing, but it's going to be a simple rectangle. We don't even have to make it a trapezoid because the mask will take care of it. So, I think this can be my beer, some kind of a rectangle. Yep, this is good enough. I will name it as beer. And this one, the trapezoid that we have made, as beer mask. Of course, I need to have the mask above the beer layer. So I will just do it. I'll just do it this way. And here's my beer. Now, for this beer layer, I'm going to go to track matte, which is by default set to none. I will click on it and select alpha matte beer mask. Now, when I do this, you see this shape is masking my layer beer. And at the end, I just see this. Now, what I will do is I will just take this beer layer and I'm going to animate it this way so that it looks like as if it's being filled or something like that. Let's go ahead and do that. If you want to know more about masks, I have a dedicated video which I have made explaining the different ways of masking. I will leave it linked in the description and also on the info button at the top right corner of this screen. So here's the beer mask. I'm going to add a position keyframe to it. So while this layer is selected, I'll hit P on my keyboard, which reveals the position. I will click on this stopwatch to add a keyframe. I'll move 120 frames ahead this time. So to do that, I will press and hold Command and Shift and press the right keyboard button 12 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So essentially you move ahead by 2 seconds. If you remember, our frame rate was 60 FPS, which means 60 frames per second, which means 120 frames is 2 seconds. So while I'm here, I'll add one more keyframe. While it's in the final position, I think this kind of looks like it's filled. And while it's in the initial, that I'll move the handle all the way to the initial one, I'll pull down this beer layer all the way to the bottom, somewhere here. So this is how it's going to animate. Awesome. Now we'll do one more thing to it, which is nothing but a layer of froth. Now this froth are not the bubbles, so froth is a different thing. So I will take a rectangle tool, a small rectangle like this. I'll give it a color white because I want my froth to be white. And I want this to move along with the layer beer. I'll name it. So this shape layer 2, I'm going to call it froth. I want this froth layer to move with my beer. So to do that, one simple way is to make this froth a child of the layer beer. To do that, I will select the froth layer, click this pick whip, and click and drag and release it over the layer beer. So now the layer froth has become a child of the layer beer. So it will move along with beer. You see, this is what is happening. Awesome. Now I just want the same mask which I've applied to the layer beer to be applied to the froth as well. So there are many ways of doing it. One simple way is to copy this beer mask, just do a Command E, put it above froth, and then go to froth and do an alpha matte beer mask too. And that will, mask the froth as well. But what we can do is I'm going to use a different technique this time. So I will delete this mask, right? So I'm here in froth. I will use an effect. From the effects and panel, I'm going to use this thing called set matte. So what set matte does is it takes one shape in the panel, and you can use the same shape as a mask for multiple layers. So instead of having to copy the mask layer every single time, you can just have one layer and let this set matte effect do the work for you. Now here's how it works. So here's my froth. You apply it to the thing that you're masking. I will drag and drop set matte to froth. Yep. So while I'm here in froth, you see it's all fine. So I will just click on the first one, which is nothing but the mask. I will pick up beer mask because that's the same mask which I'm gonna use. So the moment I click, you see the masking is done and it's using the same shape, which is nothing but the beer masks. So that's it, it's working. Next, we need to create some bubbles because how is it beer without any bubbles? So let's go ahead and do that. For that, I will use the simple ellipse tool. I will click on this and select the ellipse tool. And I'll create some bubbles. Actually, I will just create 5 of them, but when you're doing it, feel free to create as many as you want. Let me just draw the first bubble. Yep, maybe around this size is fine. Yep, now that I have drawn this, I'm going to duplicate this and keep scaling it to fit my need. So this is my first bubble. I'm just going to scale it down to around 80%. And I'll move it somewhere here. I'll make a copy of it, Command and D. It creates a new layer here. I will bring it somewhere here. And this one I want it really big. I'll hit S on the keyboard to reveal scale and I'll give it a scale of 150%. Yeah, I think 150% would be good. So I will place it somewhere here. I'll make a copy of this once again by pressing Command and D. I will move it here. And this one I will change the scaling factor to maybe 130%. Yeah, let's see how 130% works. Yep, I think this is good. I'll make a copy of this once again, do a Command and D and pull it here. And for the edge one, I want a smaller one again. So I'll hit S on the keyboard to reveal scale and I'll give it a scale of 80%. Let's see how that works. I think 80 would be good. So I will keep it somewhere here. And I will need one more thing which will kind of cover up the bottom out here. So I will make a copy of this one, this big one. I'll hit Command and D. Bring it down and I want it really big. So I'll hit S on the keyboard to reveal scale and give it a scale of 170%. Let me just try it out how it looks. 170 is actually too big. I'll make it 160%. Yep, I think 160 is good. And along with that, what I will do is I will just make some moves here as well. And this one, which I had set to 130 before, I'm going to make it bigger. Let me try and make it 160%. And I'll pull it down so that it kind of covers this part as well. Actually, I'll make it 170%. This is just an eye estimation. Whatever you think looks like real beer, that should just work. Yep, so these are all my bubbles. So I will just name them for now. I'll hit U on the keyboard so that I collapse all of them. This is my bubble 1. This is my bubble 2. I'll just copy it so that I don't have to type every time. This is my bubble 3, bubble 4, and there's my bubble 5. Cool, so that's where my bubbles are. Now before we proceed, let us make a little more changes to this layer beer. First of all, I don't really like this shade of yellow, so I'll make it a little more orangish. I will tweak the color. And I'll maybe give it this kind of a color. Looks like real beer, huh? Maybe slightly lighter. Yep. And I'll also add a shadow to it. And the way I do that is I can either introduce a shape, but that's only going to complicate things. So I'm going to use the inner shadow property of After Effects to apply that inner shadow here. So all that you need to do is click on the beer layer, go to Layer, Layer Styles, Inner Shadow. And Inner Shadow doesn't come over this effects and controls because it's not really an effect, but it's more of a layer style. So you will get to see directly here. So you see layer styles, and inside that I have this new entry called Inner Shadow. I will click open this and you'll see a couple of options here. I'll just make it bigger so that you see what's happening here. By default, it has added one shadow here and it has also softened it. But I don't want it that way. I want no softening because I'm trying a simplistic sort of illustrations. So the size, I'm going to make it 0. You see, when you increase, it just blurs more in. I'm going to make that 0. And I'm going to make this angle as 0 degree. I think that will just work. You see, you start seeing something here. I'll increase the distance from the default 5 to around, I think 25 is good enough. Yes, 25 is good. But I don't want to color black. And of course, I don't want the blending mode to be multiply. First, I will change the blending mode to normal because that's good enough for me. The opacity, I will set it to 100%. And for the color, I will choose a shade of orange, which is slightly darker than this color. So I will just pick this yellow first, and then I will make it slightly darker and give it a more orangish tint. Yep, I think that's a good shadow. I'll go ahead and click OK. Now when I hit U on the keyboard, and you see the shadow just seamlessly appears. It doesn't disturb anything else because it's a layer property. Awesome. Now it's time to tweak these bubbles. Let us make all these bubbles a child of the same beer layer so that, I don't have to take care of one less motion, which is going from bottom to top. I'll select all the bubbles from bubble 1 all the way to bubble 5. And I will click on the pick whip of any one of them because they're selected. So no matter where I do, it's all the same. I click and drag the pick whip of any one of them and release it over beer. You see all of them. Parents are set to beer. You can do it using the drop down as well, as you see here. Now when I move the slider, you see the bubbles are also moving along with the beer. But that's not how we want our bubbles to be when it's in the initial stage, and that's a change that we are going to make right now. I'll select all these bubble layers and hit P on the keyboard to reveal position. I'll click on the stopwatch to add one set of keyframes here in the final position. I'll move the handle all the way up to 0 seconds, that is the initial position, and add another set of keyframes here. So, yep, although the vertical movement is being taken care because we have parented it with a beer layer, there will be other subtle motion along the horizontal axis mostly, because of which we have added these individual position keyframes. Now let me also go ahead and add a scale keyframe to all of them. I'll select all of them, hold Shift and hit S on my keyboard, which will reveal scale. I'll click on the stopwatch to add one set of keyframes here in the initial position. I'll move the handle all the way to the final position and add another set of keyframes by clicking on this. So now we have one set of position and scale keyframes added here. I'll move my handle here, and as the first step, I will change the scale of all of them to 90%. For that, I'll select all of them and, change the value in any one of them. Let me take this for instance. I'll type 90 and hit enter. So what it does is, since they are selected, it sets 90% scale to all of them. Now I will zoom in, and this is the time we will set their position. So this is the initial stage. I want all of them to be in a single line like this. One simple way to do it is just select all of them, go to the Align tool and click on Align vertically. So this will align it, and I will also click on Distribute horizontally, so which kind of distributes these things together. And I will just center this with the mug and also ensure that everything is within the frame of the mug. So I'll hold the last ones, the first and the last ones, and I'll bring them inside. I will select all of them and click on Distribute vertically once again. Alright, now this is fine. Now what we will do is, we will move along these and we will do some frame by frame animation, which is again very simple. So wherever is needed, we will just add some keyframes here and make some changes, and that should be done. But before that, let's go ahead and ease these keyframes. I'll select all of these, go to my motion plugin here, and for the initial ones, I'll set an influence of 40% for the outgoing velocity by using this slider. I'll set it to 40%. Likewise, I'll select all the ending keyframes here and give them an influence of 80% for all the incoming velocities by using this slider, the ending slider here in my Motion 2 plugin. In case you do not have this plugin, this is an external plugin which I use, you can always do it the conventional way. So what you'll have to do is just select the keyframe, right click on them, go to keyframe velocity and set the value, just enter the value here in place of influence. You see incoming velocity, influence of 80%. So incoming velocity, this is the slider, and 80% is what we have set. I'll go ahead and click OK. So I've added the easing. Now let's go ahead and see what is happening here. Now, first of all, I do not want them to be here. I want them to be outside of the mug's frame. And to do that, I don't have to do anything to the bubble, but I will have to move the beer layer because if you remember, they are parented with the beer. So I will hold this beer layer and bring it down while it's in the initial position. It's already down, but I will move it a little more so that it just goes out of the frame. Yup, I think this much is fine because, we had an edge anyway, so it will not be seen. Yup, this is how it's happening. Now let's see, I'll move the handle slowly. And while it's here, I think these two should move a little inside. Okay? Sorry. Because, this is the limit of the glass and I do not want the bubbles to be inside the glass. Now, this will happen often, so I will just keep pulling them inside a bit, And I'll also move these things a bit so that it looks like a little bit of natural movement that is happening, a little bit of jumping while the bubbles are moving up. So, this is very random. So wherever you feel like, pausing the handle, and you can just do it and move things a little bit so that it makes it a little more natural. So, yeah, this is fine. And finally, it just goes and sits. Now, you see, these are all random. We haven't measured anything. So if you just go ahead and play, this looks like a much more natural movement of froth or bubbles, right? So this is what this randomness has done. Now this looks good. The only thing which is remaining is the masking of these. We'll use the same technique, which is set matte, which we have used for the froth. But this time the mask is not going to be this beer mask. Because, when the froth are here, when all the froth bubbles are here, I want them to be oozing out. So this mask is not going to work. So I'll quickly draw another mask, which is nothing but, I will just take the pen tool here, which is nothing but something like this. So that while it is here, it just stays within the limits. And after that, it's free to move out because, I want the bubbles to go out of the mug once it has reached a certain stage. So I will just complete this and I will create a random shape like this. Don't worry about how good this or bad this shape is because it doesn't matter. It's going to be a mask. I'm going to call it mask bubbles and I will hide it because I don't need this to be seen here. Now all that I need to do is go to effects and presets again, set matte and apply to any one of them. So I'll drag set matte and apply to bubble 5 for instance. And here I will select mask bubbles as the layer. And to see what is happening, just move the slider here. You see nothing is really happening because it's set to mask. I want it to be invert mask this time. So I want it to be invisible while it is within the limit. So I'll have to click on this. You see this has disappeared because now it's within the limit of that mask that I had drawn. Yup, this is exactly what we wanted. Now all that I need to do is select the set matte, do a Command C, copy and paste it to all the bubbles. Bubble 4, Command V, Bubble 3, Command V, Bubble 2, Command V and Bubble 1, Command V. Now the same mask has been applied to all of them. Now when I go in and hit U on the keyboard once again. Yup, this is how my beer fills the mug. Awesome. Now I just want to add one last thing. And that is nothing but a shine. And that shine is very simple. I will just grab the pen tool once again. And I will draw one line like this, which is, kind of parallel with the wall of the mug. I will give it a stroke of maybe 12. Yeah. And a color of white. And I want to give it rounded corners. And to do that, since this is a stroke, I will select the stroke, which is nothing but this. I will give it a name of shine. I'll expand the layer, go to contents, shape, stroke, and go to this thing called line cap. And I will change it to round cap. And the moment you do, it just becomes this way. And I will give it an opacity of around 40%. So I will select this, hit T on the keyboard and give it an opacity of 40%. Yup, this shine is good enough. I think it can just remain that way. Actually, I feel it's a little too bright. So why not make it 30% instead of 40? Especially when, there's no beer in it. It was looking a little dark. Yeah, I think this is good. Awesome. Now we are done with this part, right? Now let me go back to mobile main, the composition that we had made. Now in this one, in my design, I have used a purple gradient. And to do that, I will need a background. For that, I will select the rectangle tool and I will double click on it to create a rectangle which fills the entire composition, something like this. Now to do this, I will need a fill color of, a dark shade of purple, something like this. Looks fine. Actually, I'll make it a gradient. So of course I don't need stroke here. I'll make the stroke 0. And for the fill, I will give it a linear gradient, something like this, and hit OK. And these are my handles of the gradients. This is one of the most annoying things in After Effects because you tend to lose them very soon. So, I'll have to drag one of them here and the other one somewhere here. Yep. And I think the colors are pretty much fine. I want a, a pinkish sort of shade for this corner. And for the other, I want a dark violet. Yeah, this is good. So in case while you're editing the gradient, if you miss those handles, for example, I clicked outside and I deselected. Now if I click the rectangle, I don't see those handles anymore. So how do I edit the gradient? The simple solution is you just open this, click on content, rectangle, you will have this thing called gradient fill. So when you click on them, you will start seeing this handle. So that's a trick out there. Now, this is how it is, but I want this purple to be there only for the top part. So which means I will need another rectangle which covers the bottom part. I will select this rectangle, double click on it to create one more. And for this one, I will need a fill, a solid fill and not a gradient. I'll hit OK and I will set the color to a light shade of gray. And I remember the hex code, F2, F2, F2. Yep, this is good enough. I'll hit OK. But I don't want it full, of course. So this is my gray. I will just name it gray. And this is my purple background. For the gray one, I will reduce the height of it. So I will go to rectangle, rectangle path. In the size, I will uncheck this constraint proportion. And I will reduce the height to around, let's see, 1800. Hopefully 1800 should work. And while I've reduced the height, I will align it to the bottom of the screen. Actually, I'll reduce it a little more. Maybe 1700. Well, we can tweak that later as well after we have put all the elements. So these are our backgrounds. Now let me quickly go ahead and bring the cards that we had spoken about. So we have card 1, card 2, card 3 and card new. So in this, I think I will skip the card 3. I don't need them. I will just use card 1 and card 2. I will drag and bring them here. And yep, I will kind of place them here. I'll make sure that they're at the center of the screen. I'll bring them a little down and I need a header as well. I'll give it a name as well. So I'll use the text tool and write spirits. No, let's make it spirits. R-I-T-Z. And I will of course change the font to anything that, that you like. I would use a softer one. I think MC Pro should be a good one for this work the effect that I'm trying to create. Yeah, I think this is fine. I'll go to align and center it with the artboard. So this is the name of my app. Maybe, it's an app using which you can browse pubs or bars or maybe the recipes of some cocktails, so on and so forth. Okay, great. Now while we are here, we need to move these cards down because that's when the pull happens of the pull to refresh. So I'll select both of them. I'll hit P on my keyboard to reveal the position of these two, card 1 and card 2. I will click on this to add a keyframe and I will go 50 frames ahead. To do that, I will press and hold Command and Shift on the keyboard and hit the right keyboard button 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Here I'll set another set of keyframes and I will pull the cards down. So I will select them and I will pull them down. The amount of pulling that you think is needed for this effect to come about. Yep, I think this is good enough. Yeah. And now when this happens, this is where I will introduce our beer mug. So this is a beer mug composition, if you remember. I will drag and bring it over these. Okay, this has got a black background. If you remember, we had added one just for our reference. So this is the time to go ahead and hide that. So this was my background. I will just hide them so that I see only the mug here. I think the cards can go a little more down as well. Yeah, I think this much is fine. And so can the mug come a little bit more. Oh, a little bit more. It all depends on what kind of effect do you really want here. So this is what I think this much of space is enough for me, and this is from where the beer is going to fall on this. So I go back. Now while this happens, I want the beer to come down as well, the mug to come down as well. Of course, this needs to be behind my cards. Now this is my beer mug. I will add a position keyframe to this as well. I'll hit P on the keyboard, add a keyframe here, go to the final position, add another keyframe here. So this is the final state of the mug. This is fine. In the initial stage, I want the mug to be somewhere here, a little bit up. I think this, just so that, you don't start seeing this mug. So maybe around this much is good enough. So when you pull, the mug also appears. So as if the mug is hidden behind the card, and when you pull, it just reveals it and the beer starts filling. Okay. Awesome. So this is fine, but I do not want this flow to start till all this pulling and all this business happens. So in all that I'll have to do is just delay this animation, whatever we have done inside the beer mug, by a tad bit. Here we have added 50 frames. So I certainly do not want it to start before 50 frames. So I'll open the beer mug, which is here. I'll hit U on the keyboard, which will reveal all the keyframes. I'll select all of them, and move them towards the right by 50 frames. To do that, I will press and hold Option and Shift on the keyboard and hit the right keyboard button 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So, I delayed them by 50 frames so that it accounts for all this card pulling and all that we are doing. So that, only after all these things I've done, it kind of starts filling. And this is exactly what we wanted. And now the next step is, if you remember, I had done some things to this text as well. So there are 2 things that I will do to this text. One, I will increase the character spacing between them, which is nothing but the tracking. Then I will scale it a bit, and I'll also introduce one line which appears here. Let's quickly go ahead and do that. So here's my text, but before we do, I want this anchor point to be at the center and not at the bottom of the text. So I will click on this pan behind tool. I'll hold this anchor point and bring it to the center, so that the scaling that I'm going to do happens about the center and not the bottom edge. So I'll select this, hit S on my keyboard to reveal scale. I'll click on the stopwatch to add a keyframe in the final position, and I'll hold the handle and bring it to the initial position. Add one more keyframe here. The initial position looks fine because this is what the name of my app is and this is how it should be. In the final position, when the pull has happened, I want the scale to be smaller. Let's try 70%. Yep, I think 70% is good enough. This looks good. Now, along with the scaling, I want to do the tracking animation as well. I'll select the spirits layer, the text layer, go to animation, animate text, and tracking. I'll click on tracking, and you see this range selector, this new animator has been added to it. Now there are 2 things here, tracking type, which you can just ignore what it is, and another one is tracking amount, and that's what matters to us. So I'll add one keyframe for tracking amount here in the final position. I will hold the handle and bring it to the initial position, add one more keyframe here for the tracking amount. Now when it is here in the initial position, of course the tracking amount of 0 is good enough, which is nothing but the character spacing of 0. When it is here, I want it to be really big, maybe 30. Let's try 30. No, actually even more. I want it 90. 90 is probably a bit too much. How about 70? Yep, I think 70 is good enough. 70 is good. So you see, it is reducing in size and also the character spacing is increasing along with that. I feel I can scale it a little more. I had scaled it to 70% before. I think I will scale it to 60% and I'll scale it to 65%. Yeah. And I will add the tracking amount of 80 instead of 70 so that, it's a little more smaller and a little more spaced out. So that, it creates a dramatic sort of effect. And this R is the place where we are going to create the flow of the beer. But before that, let's go ahead and add that line. I'll hit U on the keyboard so that I collapse all the unwanted things that I had opened. I'll take the pen tool and draw one simple line across it. So don't worry about whether it's being centered or not centered because we can fix all those things later. So I draw this line. You see the stroke is set to 0 by default. I'll give it a stroke of maybe 2 pixels. Yeah, 2 pixels are good enough. No, I've set my quality to quarter. I'll set it to full so that you see what is happening here. Yep, this is my line. I'll give it a name, line. And now when I select it, I'm going to center it by clicking on this align horizontally. Oh wow, it was already centered. Awesome. And I will also try and vertically, roughly center it with the center of the text, so that it kind of looks like a kebab or a skewer where the pieces of meat or kebab are inserted. The kind of bar snacks that you get to eat? Yeah, so I'm just trying to replicate that. I know that this part is probably a little bit of overkill, and in a real app you may not actually get to do this, but this beer filling is certainly something that you can do. This is, okay, an optional thing, but for the sake of this tutorial, I would regardless do it. Now I'll also set the opacity of this text a little lesser when it is in the final stage. So to do that, I will add an opacity keyframe. I'll press Shift on the keyboard and hit T. It reveals opacity. I add a keyframe here. Move the handle to the initial position. Add one more keyframe. In the initial, the opacity should be 0. And in the final one, I want the opacity to be, of the text of course, of the opacity to be 60%. Yep, I think that is good enough. Yeah. And along with that, I want this line to grow about the center so that, it comes into full glory only when the cards are pulled. And to do that, we will use trim paths. If you don't know what trim paths are, I had discussed about that in the previous video. I will leave the link in the description and also in the info button in the top right corner of the screen. So let's add a trim path. I will select line, expand it. You see this add button here? I'll click on it and click on trim paths. Now trim paths, one new entry gets added here, trim paths 1. I'll expand this as well, and I'll add 2 keyframes for start as well as for end. My handle is here at the final position. Now I'll move the handle to the initial position, and here also I will add corresponding keyframes for start and end. Now when it is in the initial stage, I want the values to be 50 and 50 for both of them. So when these two values of start and end are same, you essentially don't see it because you have chopped it off from the center, about the center. And now when you see the final positions of 0 and 100 is absolutely good, so you see the line growing along with the pull. So when I see everything in context, you see all these things are moving together. The cards moving down, the mug moving down, and so are the text animation which are happening. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and quickly create the flow. For that flow, there are many ways of doing it. You can use a rectangle tool as well, but I will use a pen tool here. Not to make things complicated, but I wish to create that edge so that it looks like it's originating from this line. That's why I will use the pen tool so that I have a little more control. Here we have the flow, and now I need to color it. So this is white right now. Of course, I do not want my beard to be white. I want it to be yellow, but this line out there is white. So which means I'll apply a gradient which starts white but ends yellow. Let's apply a gradient. So I will select the flow. I will click on fill, and I'll click on this text fill so that I get to see the fill options here. So instead of a solid fill, I will select a linear gradient and I will hit OK. Now as usual, you'll see the handles are not seen because the handles are hidden somewhere here. So these are the handles of the gradient. So I will move them here so that they are within the work location that I'm working on. So these are the two handles. I'll keep the position of white somewhere here and the other end somewhere here. By default some yellow is added because I was working on a similar file before. Right, but I will tweak the color, and the way to do it is I will move the handle to a place so that I get to see the exact color of the beer so that I can pick the color if the need be. I'll click on flow, and this time I'll click on the swatch. So I'll click on this one, and while I'm here, while this one is selected, I'll use this eyedropper tool to pick the exact color of the beer so that it's the same yellow. Yeah, now this looks fine. So this is the color of the beer. Now we need to animate this flow so that it starts from this line, goes and hits the bottom of the cup, and then goes all the way back to where it was. And to do that, we will animate the path. So if you remember, this is also a Bezier path. We had spoken about Bezier path before. So to animate that, expand the flow inside shape. Inside path 1, you will see this path with the stopwatch. And I'll click on this to add a keyframe here. I will move the handle all the way to the first keyframe and add one more keyframe here. So while it's here, that's in the final position, this is how my flow should be. But while it's in the initial, I'll make some changes. To do that, I will select this path here, and using my move tool, I will start making changes to the path. I can even use the pen tool for doing the same, but I'll use the move tool. It's one and same in a way. So this is just like, you create one shape here and then you add a keyframe and move to the other point, and then you create another shape. It morphs from one shape to another. And this is also the same technique which is used for morphing icons. I'm sure you would have seen a lot of icon morphing animations done by designers, and this is exactly the technique. So here what I will do is I will just collapse these and bring them in one single line. So I will speed this part a bit because I'm not doing anything new. It is just editing a shape. So here I've edited that path and made it into one line. So while doing it, make sure that you do not remove any of the anchor points, because if you do, then it'll affect your animation. So all the anchor points need to remain intact. You just change their position and the size of the handles. Yep, and when you do that, effectively you see this flow animating, and this is exactly what we wanted. I'll hit U on the keyboard so that I don't see the unwanted things that I don't need to. Okay, great. So this is the flow is falling. I somehow feel that, this duration that I have added of 50 frames is too much for this flow. So I will select this initial one and I will move it to the right by a couple of frames. I'll press and hold Option and Shift on the keyboard and hit the right keyboard button once, twice, thrice. Yeah, I think thrice is fine. This is how I'll keep it. And I will also move all of them, all of these, because I think it's not a good idea to start the animation from 0. So I will select all of them and move them to the right by another 20 frames. I'll press and hold Shift and Option and hit the right keyboard button twice. Okay, this is good. Now I'll also ease them. To do that, I will select the initial set of keyframes and give them an influence of 40% for the outgoing velocity. And for the final ones, I will give them an influence of 80% for the incoming velocity. And for this one, I'll keep it linear because I think this is fine. Or rather, I'll make us one small change. I will make this linear and give it the same influence that I have given to all of them. So this one I will select and give it a 40% of outgoing influence. And this one I will keep linear because, it's like a flow. It comes and hits. So there's no easing. It directly hits the bottom of the mug. So let's go ahead and play it and see once. I think that looks fine. And this is roughly where the animation ends. This is the position. So if you remember, we had given it a 120 frames, which is nothing but 2 seconds. But anyways, I'm not going to measure it here because I can see the beer almost flowing to the brim. So this is where I can end everything and push things back to where they were. And to do that, I will just reverse this keyframes. Let's start with the line. I will copy these, do a Command C and Command V, paste them here. Similarly for the text, all these three things that we have changed, Command C and Command V. For the card 1 and card 2, let's not do anything right away. I'll tell you why. For the beer mug, yes again, Command C and Command V. And also for the flow, I'll do a Command C and Command V. And I'll move 50 frames ahead from here. I'll press and hold Command and Shift and hit the right keyboard button 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 times. And here I will paste these set of keyframes. Right, it looks fine. So if you see, I haven't done anything to the card 1 and the card 2 because they won't exactly get replicated to the initial stage because a new card comes and everything's position kind of changes, right? So that's the reason. So in this, I will also reduce the duration of this. Since we had given it 20 frames between them, I'll kind of do something similar. So I will keep them here. We'll take the final call once we see a preview well. Now let's go and fix the cards, which is nothing but these. Now, if you remember, these cards were here at the top, and when you pull them, they won't go back to their initial states, but to newer states because a new card comes and it makes space for that. So what will happen is the new card will take the first position this will take the second position and this will take the third position. So which means this will take the position of what the initial position of this was. So I will pick the initial position of this card. I will bring my handle here. So this, the initial position, the vertical position is 1216. I'll do a copy and I will go to the final stage, and this should be the position of that right now. I'll go here and do a Command V and paste it here. And for this one, of course, there was no third card ever on this animation, so I don't really have a benchmark. I will keep it roughly here somewhere. I'll figure that out later and adjust it later. Now this is the time where I will introduce the card new. So this is my card new. I will drag and bring it here. So here is my card new. I will bring it somewhere at the top. And of course, since I said this will be the top, the first position, this has to have the position. I will just hide the card new for a while so that it doesn't disturb. So the initial position of this should be the final position of the card new. So I will copy the initial position of this one, and it has a vertical Y position of 588. I'll copy that and I'll go to card new. I'll make it visible this time. I'll hit P on the keyboard to reveal its position. I will paste that 588 here because this is going to be the final position of my card new. So this is my card new, this is the next card which got pushed, and this is my third card, right? Now what I need to do is just ensure that the spacing between these are kind of uniform. Of course, I can do the math and find out what the spacing would be, but since there is no benchmark to follow, I will just use my eye estimation to ensure that the spacings are kind of same between them. Yeah, I think this is good enough. Okay. Alright, now this is the final stage. Well, there's one small thing. If you see this froth of that beer mug is seen. The reason being previously there was no froth, and now that we have froth, the height kind of increased and you start seeing the edge of it. So all that I need to do is select beer mug and bring it a little down so that you don't see the froth anymore. So this is my final position. And the position right before that, which is this. This is the state where this new card appears. So I'll apply some transformations to this new card, which will take care of the animation between these two states. First of all, I will make this a 3D layer. To do that, I will click on this one. This checkbox out here. This is 3D layer. I will click on this. So my card new is a 3D layer right now. And to that, I will apply a couple of transformations. One of them is X rotation, which is nothing but this. I will add a keyframe for X rotation. I'll add a keyframe for position. I'll hit P on the keyboard. So the position keyframe is added. I'll hit U so that I start seeing all of them. And I'll also add a scale keyframe. And to do that, I will press and hold Shift on the keyboard and hit S. So it reveals scale. I'll add the scale keyframe. Now I'll move the handle to the final position and add all these 3 keyframes here as well. Now the final state is all perfect. This is exactly how it should be. We go to the initial state, and here is where we make a couple of changes. For the initial stage, I will set the X rotation to -180. You don't see anything happening here because it's just flipped, right? So this is how it is rotating. I will set the quality to quarter so that it's a little easier on my system. Yep, this is how it is. But you see, this is highly distorted. That's because the default camera of After Effects is a very wide angle camera, and that's why you see this distortion. And there's a simple way to fix that, which is to add one more camera. To do that, I will click Layer, New, Camera. And when you do that, you will see the scary looking window. So don't worry about anything that is happening here. The only thing that you need to see is go to Presets, select 135mm, go ahead and click OK. You see immediately this distortion is fixed to a great extent, and this is what we wanted. Now along with that, you'll also see one new layer called Camera 1 which has appeared. Now you don't have to worry about anything. Don't do anything to it. Just hit a lock and forget that you ever put a camera here. The presence of this layer will ensure that your 3D layers are not distorted. So yeah, I have added the rotation, and I also need to scale it down to something really small, maybe I'll eventually make it 0, but for now let me make it 10% so that I at least get to see where I'm moving it. And now move it to the top here. And make sure that when you're doing it, you do not use these mouse buttons because it's a 3-dimensional layer, and if you accidentally hit one of these arrows, you may end up moving it in a direction without even knowing. So the best thing to do is to select the layer and use the keyboard up button to move it all the way up here. And in this regard, I'll also set the quality to full so that I can align it perfectly. So all that I want is it should be along this white line. And when I've frozen the position, I'll go ahead and make the scale to 0%. Okay, so it's kind of disappeared here. Now I see that I've forgotten to put these keyframes here between these cards. If you do not put them, the way it'll work is it'll consider this and this as the initial and the final stage, and it'll create the animation between this duration, and that's not what we want. So I need this set of keyframes, these keyframes here as well. So I'll copy this and paste it. Copy and paste it so that this position is a pause between the cards. So nothing happens in the cards while in this duration, and this is where the animation executes. I think this is fine. Let's go ahead and ease these and quickly have a preview. So I will set 40 and 80 for these, and let's quickly go ahead and see a preview. This looks fine, but I think the flow can end a little earlier. So I will select these two keyframes and move them towards the left. So I'll press and hold Option and Shift on the keyboard and hit the left arrow once, so that it leaves the beer mug a little before the entire card contraption happens. Yep, I think this is much better. Yep, this is much better. Now, I can do one more thing as well. I'm just nitpicking when I'm doing this. So this card, when it flies in, the remaining cards make way for the incoming card. So which means the cards do not have to start moving till the time this is almost at the edge of them. So I will do exactly that, So this is where my card is. I will not move them until the new card has arrived till this point, right? So let's see where that happens. So I will slowly move the handle. And I think this is the point where this card arrives here. And this is exactly when I would want these two cards to start moving. So this is my card 1 and card 2. All that I need to do is just select these keyframes and bring them here. I think that should work. Let's see how it looks. Might have to move it a little behind. Yep, I'll move it a little behind, somewhere, I'm not even measuring. I'm just using some eye estimation here. I think this is better than before, for sure. Let's see a preview of the whole thing once. Great, and we are done. So all that you need to do is just add some touch and swipe marks, and it'll bring the entire UI come to life. If you do not know how to make those touch marks, I will leave a link of the video in the description and also in the info button in the top right corner of the screen, where I have spoken in detail about how to create these marks. If you tried this animation and post them on social media, don't forget to tag me. The handles are right there in the description. This is Sapta. See you guys in the next one.